Welcome to another edition of Glint Standard. Today we're going to be talking about part 2 of our feedback series, how to ask for feedback from your client.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Well, we said we were coming back and we were going to talk about feedback again.
Yeah, because there's a whole other side of this coin. Because it's one thing to give feedback to your client, but how do you elicit it as an agency?
Yeah.
How do you get effective feedback from your client?
How do you get it from your client? Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So today's podcast, we're really talking to agencies or even freelancers who are performing a service for a client and want that service to be awesome so that people come back and visit them again and again and again.
Repeatedly, because you want that relationship to be healthy so that kind of feedback progresses you towards even better projects in the future.
Yeah. So. I think one thing that we've learned is that this is not easy.
No.
And I think we said it in our podcast last month. It's not easy.
Yeah.
Soliciting feedback and giving feedback is always kind of a changing process.
Yeah.
And you always have to refine it to make sure that you get what you need.
And I think that's a great point you bring up for us to start out, is that, we think, how do you get feedback from a client? You think it's simple, right? Just how do you like it? You have your nice shiny thing that you've just created, and you're like, do you like it? And you think it's that simple, but it's not. And actually, that's a very, very quick way to a very chaotic response that can cause, especially like the larger the group of individuals, the more cooks in the kitchen, as they say.
Yeah.
You want to be able to direct that specifically.
He's going to hate this, but this reminds me of a conversation I have with my 19-year-old son, Trevor.
Oh boy.
So I might text him and I ask him a question, which I think, solicits a long response. And you know what I get back? Yup.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
That's it. and it is frustrating. So I think the same thing goes for, when you are communicating with your clients and whatnot. You really want more than the yup.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a great first step into it, because both can equally be problematic. Too much feedback or too little feedback. And that's why, like, one of the best places to start is having open-ended questions on your feedback. Don't try to refrain from getting positioning questions in a way that can be a yes or a no. Leave them open-ended. Let them elaborate.
And sometimes it's appropriate.
Sometimes.
But I think where you're going is to have a mix.
Yeah.
To have a mix. And one of the things I think we have learned just through experiences with our clients and making sure that we deliver the best product is to create a tool for clients to record their feedback.
Yeah.
And you were highly instrumental in creating this tool.
They've been handy in the past, for sure.
Yes. So. And on that tool, we call it a client feedback tool. And every time we send a deliverable or something that we need to hear, whether we need to improve it or if it's great or not, we send this link in this feedback form. But it does have a mixture of the yes and no, but it also has open-ended questions at the end.
For sure. And that feedback is very helpful because it keeps a log of it as well. So, for instance, if the feedback says something along the lines of, can we stay away from, maybe you make a landing page and it has a blue background. And they're like, well, we actually need to stay away from blue.
Right.
In the future, should they forget that or decide to go back on that, you have a documented, library of that feedback.
Of that comment.
Yeah, exactly. So it protects you as an agency as well. It's not purely efficiency. It's also about protecting yourself and giving the project its due time. Not too little, not too much. So.
Well, I like to put things in writing.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I've learned that over 25 years or so. I think that's really important. But like you said, it's a good record. And then also, I know here at Glint, operationally, we like to pretend like if anybody were to look at a document or a statement or whatnot, they can take that and move it forward.
Yeah.
That's basically how we try to operate. We're not perfect, everybody. I mean, there's always tweaks, and we're always trying to improve that. But having a feedback form helps us do that. So that way, if you're getting the feedback, there's a process for you to log that in and save it, and to create action steps on top of it. And the same should happen if I see it.
Yeah. 100%.
Or if someone else sees it. Yeah. So I think that is a really good thing for anyone who's providing a service to a client, to put things in writing, perhaps create a tool that guides your client to what they need to provide feedback on, versus just really open-ended, like, do you like it? Yep.
Or the inverse, a 3-page response as to like what they do and don't like. So there's both ends of the spectrum. I'm glad you brought up the feedback form because I think the feedback form is very effective. But I think what a lot of people may run into sometimes is, what do I put on the feedback form? And that's why I think it's really important to, one of my points is that when you have that feedback form, you tie it back to the brief. The feedback form should be mixed elements of the brief and covering specifically what's in the brief as well, so that it creates consistency across the project itself, because it can be very easy for projects to snowball, and all of a sudden, you look at the final product and you're like,
it is completely different.
Yeah, there are about 4 or 5 things in here that
than what was discussed.
Yeah, exactly.
So. And for those of you that don't know what we're talking about when we're talking about a brief, usually in delivering a service, you want to have some sort of written agreement, an MOU kind of, so to speak, a creative MOU or a project MOU, so that both parties involved are on the same page. Now, sometimes it's not going to be the law. I mean, it's not going to be what everybody agrees on at the end of the day, but at least it's a good starting point. So what Jonathan is saying is, go back to that brief.
Review
it. Go back and look at the goals. Like, what are we trying to achieve? And it's really important.
For sure, 100%. And I think an unused tool on those feedback forms too is the pre-fill sections, because I think a lot of times what runs into individuals that provide, especially individuals that provide excessive feedback, is they know they're supposed to provide feedback, but they don't know exactly in what regard. So they end up going on a little bit of in a polite way of saying, a little bit of a rant about, like, okay, well, this, and then next thing you know, they're on a whole red herring trail where they're talking about something completely different than what was purely the focus of that project. So I think using those pre-fills, so for instance, if it says general comments, use that pre-fill and have kind of some general comments. Examples, exactly, so that you can kind of see.
Usually those are grayed out, kind of light. I think you're right. I think that's a very good idea. Another thing about our form, and guys, I mean, you can tell we're very proud. We have an upload section, so sometimes people are not written communicators at all.
Great point.
And so for those that aren't, and perhaps like to tear up their pieces of paper or like make markings on them, we have the option where they can do that, but then they can also upload. Now, I do have a question. If somebody wanted to do their own feedback form, let's say they're in the midst of working with people, what's a good, or a couple of good platforms for people to do that's perhaps free, a little free, where they can create something like that?
Something we've seen from people that are pretty effective. I know a couple of our vendors use them, and then of course we've used them a couple of things before in the past, but Google Sheets actually is a very great place to document that and keep those, because you can always duplicate those feedback forms in tabs across the top, so you can have a history and record. It's not necessarily, keeping a history and record doesn't necessarily mean that I have to create a whole landing page and do this whole process, where that's great. You can dress it up, you can make it look real nice, and really brand it to your agency's specific colors and themes, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. Something as simple as a Google Sheet.
With the little Google form and within it. You're good to go. It's marketing on a budget. And being really professional and staying on top of things.
And then having it universal so you can access it anywhere. That's always great too. Because Lord knows the number of devices we all have.
I know.
Sometimes it's hard to remember which ones log into what. So
I follow this TikTok content creator who loves small devices. And so I don't know, you may have heard me say that I love them as well too. And I do. hint, hint to our clients who are getting a Christmas gift this year. But and she talks about all of her devices and keeping everything in sync and what type of challenge that is. Yeah. So really, the Google workspace and the whole Google environment is a good way to kind of keep things together.
It's also a great entry point. You know, if you don't have a lot of experience with some of those other softwares or maybe some of those paid platforms, sometimes it's easier just to start there. And because of the familiarity, and then how it works in tandem with all the other Google products, like that's always a really, really good one.
Well, I think a good way for service providers or partners to provide the best product possible is to have frequent touch-ins with their clients or their customers. Here at Glint, we call them pulse checks. And it goes in vein of human resources professionals who did all of this research, and they found that having an annual review or something for their employees just wasn't effective enough. It didn't catch all of the gaps perhaps in learning along the way, to just sit down one time in the year, and talk about it. So what they did is they thought, okay, we're going to have more frequent touches with people, stand-up meetings, and we're going to call them, and some professionals call them pulse checks, but some just call them just stand-up meetings or whatnot. And so, but here at Glint, we call them pulse checks. And that basically means that we are having conversations often, more often than we're not. And a lot of times that helps us catch mistakes. I had just had a pulse check earlier this week that completely changed the direction of a project. And I'm so thankful that we had that opportunity to talk because it wouldn't have been caught.
How long do you think those pulse checks sometimes need to be or could be?
I'm always a fan of in and out. But what I've learned is people are like, they feel rushed with that. But truthfully, if I answer that question, I would say 10 to 15 minutes is really good. And it really depends on how often you are meeting with people. If you're meeting with people once a month, I'd say a good hour or blocking that off is good. But if you're meeting with them every other week or every week, maybe it's 10 minutes.
Super quick.
10 or 15 minutes. Have one item, hot topic on your agenda, tackle that and move on. Because it's not like you're not communicating in other ways.
No, for sure.
Via email or maybe a quick phone call, that sort of thing.
You want to be efficient. You want to be respectful of everybody's time. Yes. I imagine, too, a side effect of that as well is that, we as an agency, a big part of, our approach to our clients is really strong relationships and connections. We really go above and beyond to make sure that our clients are heard and understood, and that their concerns are our concerns, and that we can navigate that and make them feel secure. Those pulse checks are a really great way to build that relationship because they are one-on-one. Forms and stuff are great, and they're great for real quick feedback or just documented feedback. But those one-on-one connections, those are always going to be far superior to just the overall health of the relationship between the client and the agency. So we're a big fan of pulse checks here.
I do. I think it really helps us a great deal. So I question though, just we're talking about feedback and we're talking about our clients giving us feedback and how they did that last week, and now we're talking about how we get them to give us the best type of feedback. Sometimes that's not like rainbows and sunshine.
No, sometimes it's not.
Sometimes, and sometimes we might get feedback or get the feedback back, the comments back, and we might feel like we have to push back on what is being said. Either because we just have experience or expertise in that area. So, what examples could you give me? Have you seen or heard through here? And what would you say is a good way of taking it in and kind of pivoting?
Well, first I would like to address usually where that comes from. Because it usually comes from a pretty consistent place, and it usually is when there's a room of, again, multiple cooks in the kitchen. And when you have one cook that feels like they may not be contributing as much as the other cooks, there's usually a little extra pressure subliminally on their end to give some kind of feedback. Now, when you receive that feedback, you may look at it and be like, what are you talking about? Like this isn't a big deal.
Yeah.
And that's where like what you're referring, you have to take that into account and show that care without coming off as dismissive. Because the feedback does matter. You know, that's why they're providing it, and that's why, you know, you're building that relationship. You asked for some examples. My brain goes straight to a few copy examples I've had in the past, where, for instance, somebody wants to replace, you know, a word or use a synonym that's very, it's almost identical.
It's like,
but it's just,
it's a synonym.
Yeah, it's a synonym. It's almost identical, but it's very very extra. And I'm trying to think of like a specific. It's very subjective. One example was like, for one client I remember in the past, they were talking about something being excessive, and I think the word that was used, because it was a very down to earth campaign. It was very, you know, the copy was a little bit looser in terms of some of the words we could use, but it was like we were talking about a heck of a lot, and it was some other word that was just like just gave off the same meaning, but they're synonyms, and they're both very down to earth, especially that specific campaign. So at the time, it felt very it's gonna take more time to retract this, go back, make the edits, and then send it back off again. So that's where you're referring to how you navigate that. That's where you hear it. And you walk through the process of explaining that, you know, the general, you know, in that specific instance, the general public understands that word. And you just guide them as the expert, because you are the expert. That's why they're coming to you, you know. So you just guide them, and as long as you have a very well thought out explanation as to why the approach that you took or the direction you took, they're usually willing to let it go. Not many people are willing to die on that hill. However, it is important to also understand, because it's about balance. When you identify that they are wanting to die on that hill, maybe it is something that
just step back.
Yeah,
and
just take a step back. Yeah.
I found that usually when those things happen, we might be on different planes. Yeah. And it's just an effort to get to the center and on the same plane. Yeah. Really. I think 9 times out of 10 it's a misunderstanding. Yeah, usually. And I think this is where a very important life skill comes into play, and that is being open-minded. It's not saying you're surrendering to anything. No. It is being able to see another perspective so you can find the one that moves you forward. Yeah,
and it's currency. You know, we talk about this a lot. You know, we quote this around the office. Like, currency is king, but not all currency is money. Yeah. And sometimes giving that advocacy for that idea can buy you goodwill in the future towards something else. So if it is something that you can tell that maybe a particular individual, a particular client is very dead set on it, knowing when to negotiate that and go that direction can buy you goodwill in the future towards maybe something that you want to push harder for.
I agree. Also, just an actionable item on that as well is prioritizing things. Like their importance. Yeah. So if you create a list, and sometimes it is about just jotting it down. I mean, like, is the header a high priority? Yeah. If it is low on the list, okay, then we're not gonna have tension. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. Yeah. But perhaps it is the main focus image. Yeah. Then this is something we need to target. Yeah. You know. So 100%. I would say, like, trying to get to the root of things. Yeah. And then also prioritizing the importance of things, and that helps you kind of realize how much effort you're going to put into the pushback. Yeah. But anyway, I don't know. I think we've given our audience some good tips, especially those that are, again, providing services for their clients. We have a great feedback form that we use, and it so far has been successful. We'll be making tweaks on it, I'm sure, pretty soon. We have frequent touches, pulse checks with our clients to make sure everybody's on the same page, and to really iron out any issues that we have. And then another thing is going back to our creative briefs or our project MOUs. It's really important, making sure that is always forefront, and it's not just a written document that stays missing and unseen.
In a file somewhere,
just to say that we've done it. And then we've also talked about how you manage and navigate pushback or things you may not agree about, you know, as an agency. Yeah. So Yeah, that's part 2.
Yeah.
I don't know. Are we going to do any more parts?
No, this was the end of this part, but we have some very, very good topics in the future regarding AI, so I'm looking forward to those. But yeah, that's it for feedback for today. You can follow Glint on all social channels, and you can also find more episodes of our podcast wherever podcasts are available to you. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Please give us a thumbs up below if you like this episode, and feel free to leave us any questions or comments you may have. To check out our past episodes, do so here. Subscribe to our channel below.